The Arizona sun had a way of making everything shimmer, turning the world into something between a dream and a threat. Phoenix in August was the kind of heat that didn't ask permission, the kind that seeped into your bones and reminded you that nature could kill you if you forgot to respect it. Ruth Brennan stood in her garden at 6 in the morning before the day turned vicious, with a green rubber hose in her weathered hands and gospel hymns on her lips. She was 83 years old, 5'2", in shoes she'd stopped wearing years ago, with white hair pulled back in a bun that had been her signature since 1965. Her hands shook slightly, now the tremor that came with age, and something worse, but they still knew how to tend roses. The garden was her cathedral. 27 bushes cultivated over 46 years, each one placed with intention and loved into blooming. Red's the color of fresh blood, yellow soft as morning light, white so pure they almost hurt to look at. She moved between them with the slow reverence of someone who understood that beauty required patience, and that patience was its own kind of prayer. She sang while she worked, old hymns her mother had taught her in Boston songs that remembered Ireland, even though Ruth had never been there, had never been anywhere much except Arizona and the small corner of Texas where she'd married Hank Brennan when they were both 19 and stupid with certainty. Amazing grace, how sweet the sound. Her voice was thin now, reedy with age, but it still carried the tune. I once was lost, but now am found. The water arced from the hose, catching sunlight, creating tiny rainbows in the desert air. Was blind, but now I see. She thought about Hank while she watered the roses. Always did. 47 years since she'd buried him, and still he occupied space in her morning routine, in the songs she sang and the way she moved through the world. The trellis he'd built still stood against the east wall, rough-cut, wood-weathered gray, by decades of sun, strong as the day he'd hammered it together, because Ruth had mentioned wanting one, and Hank had never been the kind of man who needed asking twice. Before the damage anyway. Before the boxing matches had turned his brain into a battlefield and transformed love into something that wore love's face but struck with hate's fists. Ruth moved to the largest bush, the one she planted the year Marcus was born. 58 years old now, this plant thick as a man's wrist at the base, throwing blooms every spring, like it was trying to prove something about survival. She knelt slowly, joints protesting, and checked the soil moisture with fingers that remembered when touching dirt had been easier. The pain in her abdomen pulsed, that constant companion she'd lived with for 18 months now. The cancer eating her from the inside out, quiet and efficient, turning her body into something foreign. She'd known for a year and a half, known and said nothing. Not to Marcus, not to the doctors who'd wanted to start treatment immediately, not to anyone except Hank during her nightly conversations with ashes in a brass urn that sat on her bedroom dresser. Hank would have understood, Hank who'd spent the last years of his life trapped inside a body that no longer obeyed him, watching helpless as chronic traumatic encephalopathy turned him into a monster. Hank knew about choosing silence, about protecting people you loved from truths that would only bring pain. Ruth finished with the roses and turned off the water. The sun was climbing now, heat beginning its daily assault. She walked back toward the house, a small adobe structure painted the pale yellow of early morning light, the same color she'd chosen in 1978, when she'd finally saved enough from her nursing salary to repaint after Hank died. Inside, the kitchen smelled like coffee and yesterday's dinner. She'd made pot roast, eaten half, put the rest in the refrigerator, where it would probably stay until it spoiled, because her appetite had become a memory of appetite, her body rejecting food the way it was rejecting life. She sat at the kitchen table with her coffee black because cream upset her stomach now, and looked at the 2 envelopes she'd prepared 3 weeks ago when the pain had gotten bad enough that she'd known time was running out. One envelope addressed to Marcus in her careful handwriting. Inside the letter she'd written and rewritten 17 times until she got the words right. The words that would tell her son about the cancer, about his father's CTE, about the fact that Marcus himself was showing signs of the same damage. The words that would either save him or break him, and she wouldn't be there to know which. The second envelope was older, yellowed at the edges, sealed with tape that had lost its stick decades ago. Hank's handwriting on the front, those block letters he'd learned in grade school before dropping out at 14 to work in his father's garage. Ruth had carried this letter for 47 years, waiting for the right time to give it to Marcus. Waiting for old enough, mature enough, ready enough. She'd waited too long. The clock above the stove read 6:45. Sunday morning. Marcus would call at 7, like he did every Sunday, his voice gravel rough with sleep and a lifetime of cigarettes he had finally quit 5 years back. He'd ask how she was doing. She'd say fine. He'd ask about the roses. She'd tell him they were blooming beautifully. He'd offer again to move her somewhere safer, somewhere he could keep an eye on her. She'd refuse again because Ruth Brennan hadn't spent 83 years on this earth to become someone's burden. Except the burden was coming anyway. The cancer didn't care about her pride. Ruth stood, carried her coffee to the sink, and looked out the window at her garden. The roses swayed in the morning breeze, and for a moment she could almost see Hank out there, young and whole building, that trellis with his shirt off and his muscles working under skin that hadn't yet learned about violence. The phone rang. 7 o'clock exactly. Marcus punctual as sunrise. She picked up. "Good morning, my wild boy." "Morning, Ma." His voice carried warmth and something else, something she'd learned to recognize over the decades. Worry. "You sound tired." "I'm 83. Tired comes with the territory." "You sleep okay?" "Like a baby. Woke up every 2 hours crying." Her standard joke. He'd heard it 100 times but still chuckled because that's what good sons did. "The roses doing all right. Blooming like they're trying to show off. You should come by see them." A pause. "I will, this week, I promise." He always promised. Sometimes he delivered. Ruth didn't hold it against him. Being president of the Hells Angels Phoenix chapter meant his time belonged to other people, to the brotherhood, to responsibilities that required leather and chrome, and the kind of presence that made men step aside on the street. "How are you doing, son?" "Really doing." Another pause, longer this time. Marcus had never been good at lying to her. "Busy? Got a charity ride coming up for the Veterans Hospital? Logistics are a nightmare?" "That's not what I asked." She heard him sigh, heard the creak of what was probably his leather jacket as he shifted position. "I'm fine, Ma, same as always." But he wasn't fine. She could hear it in his voice in the spaces between words. The headaches he didn't mention, the memory gaps he tried to hide, the anger that came on fast and mean just like Hank's used to. The cancer was killing her. CTE was killing her son. And Ruth Brennan, who had spent a lifetime fixing other people's pain as a nurse, couldn't fix either one. "Marcus, I need you to promise me something. Anything. If something happens to me, don't you dare." "Ma, don't talk like that." "Listen." Her voice sharpened the tone she'd used when he was 7 in testing boundaries. "If something happens, there are 2 letters in my bedroom dresser. Top drawer, right side under my good stockings. One from me, one from your father. I need you to read them both. Promise me." Silence. Then quietly, "Why are you talking like this?" "Because I'm 83 and practical." "Promise me, Marcus." "I promise, so." "Good boy." She softened her voice. "Now go do whatever it is you wild boys do on Sunday mornings. I've got roses to admire." "I love you, Ma." "I know you do, baby. I know." She hung up and stood there holding the phone, feeling the weight of all the things she hadn't said. The cancer spreading through her pancreas and liver. The pain that woke her at 3 in the morning and wouldn't let her sleep again. The blood in her urine that told her time was measured in weeks, now not months. But she'd chosen silence because Marcus would have stopped living his life to watch her die, and Ruth Brennan would be damned if her last gift to her son was the memory of her suffering. She walked back through the house past photographs on the wall. Marcus at 5, gap-toothed and grinning. Marcus at 16, already wearing leather, already finding the path that would define him. Marcus at 30, standing between her and Axel Drummond, his vice president and best friend, all three of them laughing at something she couldn't remember now. And one photograph of Hank, young Hank, before the damage Hank, 20 years old in his wedding suit looking at the camera like he could fight the whole world and win. She kept this picture because she needed to remember that the man who'd hurt her, who'd hurt Marcus, who died in a jail cell because his damaged brain couldn't tell him to stop fighting, had once been someone different. Someone who'd wept when Marcus was born, who'd built her a trellis because she'd mentioned wanting one, who'd loved her in the only way his broken neurology would allow. Ruth made it to the bathroom before the nausea hit. She vomited into the toilet, her body rejecting the coffee, rejecting everything. When it passed, she rinsed her mouth and looked at herself in the mirror. The woman looking back was a stranger. Gray skin, hollow eyes, 90 pounds in a body that had once carried 120. The cancer had stolen her weight, her appetite, her strength, but it hadn't stolen her mind. Not yet. She had maybe 2 weeks, maybe 3 if her Irish stubbornness counted for something, which it usually did. 2 weeks to make sure Marcus would be okay. 2 weeks to pass on everything she'd learned about survival and love and the difference between the two. 2 weeks to finish what she'd started 58 years ago when she'd held her newborn son and promised him she'd teach him to be better than his father. Ruth walked outside into heat that was already oppressive. Back to the roses. Back to the only cathedral she'd ever needed. She picked up the hose again, turned the water on, and aimed it at the largest bush. The one planted for Marcus. The one that had survived drought and frost and neglect and time coming back stronger every spring, throwing blooms that defied the desert to kill it. You're going to make it, she told the plant, told herself, told the universe. You're going to be fine. The rosebush didn't answer, just swayed in the breeze, red petals catching light, looking like nothing so much as a blood and hope mixed together in equal measure. Ruth watered the roses and sang Amazing Grace and tried not to think about the 2 letters in her dresser drawer, about the words she'd written that would either save her son or break him, about the cancer eating her from inside while she pretended to be fine. The garden needed tending. That was enough. For now, it had to be enough. She worked until 8:30 when the heat became too much even for her stubbornness. Back inside, she made tea. She wouldn't drink, and toast. She wouldn't eat, and sat in her chair by the window looking out at the roses while the morning stretched into afternoon, and the pain in her abdomen settled into its familiar rhythm. The phone rang again at 2, Marcus checking in like he did most Sundays if he had time. She told him she was fine. He told her about the charity ride planning. They talked for 17 minutes about everything and nothing, and when he hung up, Ruth sat there thinking about all the conversations they'd never have, all the Sunday calls that would go unanswered, all the roses that would bloom without her there to see them. She thought about Hank, about the good years before the boxing had destroyed his brain, about the way he'd looked at her when they were 19 and convinced love was enough to conquer anything, about how wrong they'd been and how right, because love hadn't conquered the damage, but it had survived. It had persisted through violence and fear and 47 years of one-sided conversations with ashes in a brass urn. Ruth stood up too fast. The world tilted. She grabbed the armrest, waited for the vertigo to pass, but it didn't pass. It got worse. The room spun. Her left arm went numb. Her face felt strange, like it belonged to someone else. She tried to call out, but her mouth wouldn't form words. Tried to reach for the phone, but her hand wouldn't cooperate. Tried to stay on her feet, but her legs had forgotten how to hold her weight. Ruth Brennan fell. The world went sideways, then dark around the edges. Through the window, she could see her roses red and yellow and white swaying in the afternoon breeze. She could smell them even from here, or maybe she was just remembering what they smelled like. Either way, it was the last thing she registered before the stroke took her down completely. The last thought she had before consciousness left was not fear for herself, but fear for Marcus. Fear that he'd arrived too late. Fear that he'd arrived too angry. Fear that in trying to save her, he'd become exactly what she'd spent a lifetime begging him not to become. Then the darkness took her and Ruth Brennan, who'd watered her roses that morning, and sung Amazing Grace and talked to her son about everything except the truth slipped into the space between living and dying where time moved differently and pain couldn't follow. Her neighbor, Margaret Sullivan, found her 20 minutes later. Margaret was 76, had lived next door for 30 years, and knew Ruth's schedule well enough to recognize when something was wrong. She'd heard a thud through the wall. Knocked, got no answer. Used the spare key Ruth had given her years ago for exactly this kind of emergency. Margaret saw Ruth on the floor, called 911, with shaking hands stayed on the line while the dispatcher walked her through, checking for breathing and pulse. Both present but wrong, unsteady, like Ruth's body was trying to remember how to stay alive, but couldn't quite manage it. The ambulance arrived 7 minutes later. Kathleen Murphy, EMT specialist, 42 years old with red hair, pulled back, incompetent hands that had delivered bad news more times than she could count. She assessed Ruth quickly, called the stroke, started IV fluids, loaded her onto a gurney, while her partner radioed ahead to Desert Springs Medical Center. They were 6 minutes out, 6 minutes under normal circumstances. But circumstances were rarely normal in Phoenix on a Sunday afternoon in August. They loaded Ruth into the ambulance. Kathleen climbed in back, started monitoring vitals while her partner Tom climbed into the driver's seat and pulled onto the streetlights and sirens announcing their urgency to anyone who cared to listen. For 3 minutes, everything went according to protocol. Ruth stable but deteriorating, blood pressure dropping, heart rate erratic. Kathleen doing everything she could to keep this woman alive until they could get her to people with better equipment and more options. Then Tom's voice came through the partition. "We've got a problem." Kathleen looked up. Through the windshield, she could see Cedar Hill Boulevard ahead, and filling it completely was chaos. Cars. Maybe 30 of them, all modified, all loud, scattered across both lanes like someone had spilled a toy box across the road. Young men standing around phones, out music thumping from open doors. A street racing meet illegal and obvious and completely blocking their path. "Go around," Kathleen said. "Can't. They're blocking both lanes and both shoulders." Tom pulled the ambulance to a stop 30 feet from the nearest car, a bright yellow Honda with a wing on the back that served no purpose except announcing its owner's taste. He hit the air horn. No response. Hit it again. One kid looked up, saw the ambulance, shrugged, went back to his phone. Kathleen felt her jaw tighten. She'd been an EMT for 20 years. She'd seen people die because of traffic, because of delays, because of circumstances beyond anyone's control. But she'd never seen people actively choose to let someone die. She jumped out of the ambulance and walked toward the nearest group. 5 guys, all early 20s, all dressed like they thought life was a music video. One of them was recording on his phone, probably streaming to the followers who validated his existence. "I need you to move your vehicles. Now, we have a critical patient." The kid with the phone, Tyler Frost, 24 years old with bleached hair and a BMW M5 that had cost more than most people made in 2 years, looked at her like she was speaking another language. "We're kind of in the middle of something." "I don't care what you're in the middle of. Move your cars." Tyler glanced at his phone screen at the viewer count climbing, at the comments, scrolling by telling him to stand his ground, to not let some ambulance push him around. He looked back at Kathleen and smiled. "This is a public street. We've got just as much right to be here as you do." Kathleen stepped closer. 20 years of dealing with drunk drivers and overdoses and people who thought emergency services were optional had taught her patience, but that patience had limits. "I have an 83-year-old woman in that ambulance who's had a stroke. Every minute we sit here, her brain is dying. Move. Now. Tell Grandma to wait her turn." Tyler's friends laughed. Phones everywhere recording, turning this moment into content, into entertainment, into proof that they mattered. Kathleen's hand moved to her radio. She called dispatch, requested police assistance, gave her location. Then she walked back to the ambulance where Ruth Brennan lay unconscious, her brain bleeding, while children played games in the street. Inside the ambulance, Ruth drifted in the strange space between consciousness and its absence. She couldn't see, couldn't speak, couldn't move. But some part of her, the part that had survived Hank's violence and Marcus's rebellion and 83 years of life trying to grind her down, could still hear. She heard Kathleen's voice tight with anger, heard the thump of music from the cars outside, heard laughter young and careless and certain of its own invincibility. And she heard Kathleen make a phone call. Mr. Brennan, this is Kathleen Murphy, EMT specialist with Phoenix Fire and Rescue. I'm calling about your mother. Somewhere in the darkness where Ruth floated, she wanted to scream. Wanted to tell Kathleen not to call Marcus, not to bring her wild boy into this, not to light the fuse that would turn him into his father. But she had no voice, no body, no way to stop what was coming. All she could do was drift and listen and pray that the son she'd raised would remember the lessons she'd spent a lifetime teaching. Don't become your father, she thought into the void. Please, baby, don't become your father. Marcus Brennan stood in the clubhouse parking lot, the Phoenix sun turning everything to copper and gold, and felt his phone vibrate in his vest pocket. He pulled it out, saw the unknown number, almost sent it to voicemail. Club policy during meetings was no phones unless it was an emergency. Something stopped him, a tightness in his chest that felt like his mother's voice saying, "Pay attention, boy." He held up one hand to silence the table where 14 brothers sat discussing charity ride logistics. Axel Drummond looked up, read Marcus's face, nodded once. Marcus answered, "Brennan." "Mr. Brennan, this is Kathleen Murphy, EMT specialist with Phoenix Fire and Rescue." Professional voice controlled, but underneath it, Marcus heard urgency. "I'm calling about Ruth Brennan. We have her in our ambulance. She suffered a stroke." The world tilted. Not dramatically, not like in movies where everything goes silent and time slows down. Just a gentle shift, like the ground deciding it wasn't quite as solid as it used to be. "Where?" Marcus's voice didn't sound like his own. "Where are you?" "We're en route to Desert Springs Medical Center. Your mother was in her garden when it happened. Her neighbor called 911. Mr. Brennan, I need you to listen carefully. Your mother's condition is critical. With stroke patients, every minute counts. We're doing everything we can, but how long to the hospital?" "Under normal circumstances, 18 minutes. But sir, we have a situation." Marcus was already standing. Around the table, 14 sets of eyes tracked him, reading the shift in his body language, the way predators read prey. "What situation?" "We're stuck on Cedar Hill Boulevard. There's some kind of street racing event. The road's completely blocked. I've asked them to move. We've been here 11 minutes, but they're refusing." Something cold and ancient stirred in Marcus's chest. Something that remembered his father's hands forming fists. Something that knew about violence the way some people knew about prayer. "How many of them?" 20, maybe 30, modified cars. They're... Kathleen paused, and in that pause, Marcus heard her professionalism warring with her anger. "They're treating this like a joke, Mr. Brennan. I told them we have a critical patient." One of them said. In the background, faint but clear, a young voice cut through. "Tell Grandma to wait her turn. We're racing here." Laughter, male voices, young and stupid, and sure of their invincibility. The cold thing in Marcus's chest spread through his veins like ice water. He'd felt this before, this particular flavor of rage. It was the same feeling he'd gotten when he was 15, watching his father beat a man unconscious in a bar parking lot. The same feeling when he was 23 and pulled a brother off a woman who couldn't defend herself. The same feeling that made him dangerous, made him exactly like the man he'd spent his whole life trying not to become. "I'm coming." Marcus's voice was flat, dead calm. The brothers around the table recognized that tone. It was the sound of a decision being made, consequences be damned. "Keep my mother stable. I'll handle the road." He ended the call, looked up at 14 faces that knew better than to ask questions. "My mother's in an ambulance. Stroke. Some punks are blocking the road, won't let her through to the hospital." He paused, let that sink in. "We ride, now." Axel was the first to stand. Then the others like a wave. No discussion, no debate. In the brotherhood, when one man's family was threatened, it became every man's family. What's the play? Prez. Axel's voice was quiet. Marcus headed for the door, grabbing his helmet off the hook. We're going to ask them nicely to move. And if they don't, Marcus paused at the door, one hand on the frame. Outside, the Arizona sun was turning the world to copper and gold, and somewhere in that world, his mother was dying while children played games in the street. Then we ask in our language. The sound of 20 Harley-Davidson motorcycles starting simultaneously was something felt in the chest before it was heard with the ears. Thunder and promise and warning all rolled into one mechanical roar. The kind of sound that made people stop what they were doing and look up because, on some primal level, they recognized it as the approach of something that didn't ask permission. Marcus straddled his bike, a 2003 Road King with more miles than most men saw in a lifetime, and felt the familiar vibration travel through his body. This machine had carried him through 3 divorces, 2 cancer scares among brothers, and one memorable run-in with the ATF that had ended with lawyers earning their keep. It knew him, he knew it, and right now they were both heading somewhere that might not end well. The formation was automatic. Marcus took point. Axel rode sweep. The others filled in between, staggered like geese in flight, taking up the whole lane because they had the right to and because presence mattered. They rolled out of the parking lot and onto the street, and Phoenix opened up before them like a promise that had been half kept. Strip malls and adobe houses, palm trees that had no business surviving in the desert, billboards, advertising injury lawyers, and Jesus in equal measure. Marcus's mind was ice. He thought about his mother, 83 years old, lying in an ambulance while her brain bled. He thought about the roses she'd been watering that morning, red as fresh blood, her pride and joy. He thought about the way she used to sing while she cooked old songs in a voice that remembered Ireland, even though she'd never been there. And he thought about his father, Hank Brennan, dead 47 years now gone when Marcus was 11 years old. A bar fight that went too far, a man who couldn't walk away from disrespect even when walking away would have saved his life. Don't become your father. That's what Ruth had always said. You've got his fire boy, but you don't have to let it burn the same way. The convoy ate up the miles. 4 minutes to Cedar Hill Boulevard. Marcus used his radio to coordinate. Hammer, take the north intersection. Don't let anyone in or out. Copy, Prez. Chain south side, same deal. On it. They were setting up a perimeter before they even arrived, containing the situation. It was tactical thinking, military precision, the kind of coordination that came from years of riding together, trusting each other with lives and freedom and all the things that mattered. Marcus's phone rang again. Kathleen Murphy. Mr. Brennan, your mother's vitals are deteriorating. We need to move now. 2 minutes away. We don't have 2 minutes. Her blood pressure is crashing. If we don't get her to surgery soon. The line cut off. Marcus didn't need to hear the rest. He knew what happened when stroke patients didn't get treatment fast enough. He'd seen it as a kid, watching his father deteriorate, watching CTE turn a man into a shell. Cedar Hill Boulevard came into view. The scene was exactly what Kathleen had described, and somehow worse. 30 cars, all modified, all loud, scattered across both lanes like someone had spilled a bucket of Hot Wheels. Music thumped from open doors, bass so heavy Marcus felt it in his fillings. Young men, boys, really none of them over 25, stood around like they owned the world, phones, out recording everything. In the middle of it all, the ambulance sat silent and helpless. Emergency lights still flashing, a monument to hope running out. Marcus's convoy arrived like a thunderstorm. 20 bikes formation, perfect engines rumbling in a frequency that drowned out the car stereos. They didn't have to announce themselves. The sound did it for them. The street racers turned. Some of them looked nervous. Most looked defiant. And one, a kid with bleached hair in a BMW M5 that probably cost more than Marcus's house, looked like he'd just won the lottery. Yo, chat. The kid was talking to his phone, live streaming everything. We got Hell's Angels here. This is about to be epic. Marcus dismounted, removed his helmet, made eye contact with the kid. Tyler Frost. Marcus knew the name, knew the reputation. TikTok influencer with 280,000 followers, all of them watching him do stupid things at high speed. The kind of kid who thought consequences were for other people. Marcus walked forward. His brothers stayed on their bikes' engines, idling a wall of leather and chrome, and the kind of patience that had limits. Son, Marcus's voice carried without shouting. That ambulance has my mother inside. You have 10 seconds to move your vehicle. Tyler grinned at the camera. Or what, old man, you going to hit me on live stream? That's assault, boomer. I got 15,000 people watching right now. You touch me, you're done. Marcus counted to 5 in his head. Old habit. His father used to count to 3 before he started swinging. Marcus had learned that adding 2 more seconds gave you time to think, time to remember that some actions couldn't be taken back. I'm asking nicely, move the car, let the ambulance through. And I'm saying no. Tyler was performing now, playing to his audience. This is a public street. We got just as much right to be here as some ambulance. Maybe Granny should have called earlier. Behind Tyler, his friends laughed. Phones everywhere recording broadcasting, turning tragedy into content. Marcus felt the old darkness, rising, the thing that lived in his chest, that shared DNA with his father, that wanted nothing more than to teach this child what respect looked like when delivered through broken teeth. He took a step forward. The bike's revved 20 engines synchronized a warning in mechanical form. A police cruiser pulled up, lights flashing. Officer Sarah Crane stepped out, 47 years old, 22 years on the force, in a particular expression that said she'd seen this movie before and didn't like how it ended. Everybody just take it down about 5 notches. Her hand rested on her belt, not threatening, just present. What's the situation? Tyler turned to her, all innocence. Officer, we're just hanging out, and these bikers are threatening us. I got it all on video. Sarah looked at the ambulance, looked at Marcus, looked at Tyler. Son, I'm going to give you one chance to make the smart choice. Move your vehicle. Now. Am I breaking any laws, officer? Sarah's jaw tightened. You're obstructing traffic. No, I'm legally parked. Check your codes. I'm not in a red zone, not blocking a fire hydrant. Those bikers, though, they're clearly engaging in intimidation. It was true, technically. The law had loopholes you could drive a BMW through, and Tyler knew every one. Sarah caught Marcus's eye. In that look, he saw everything she couldn't say out loud. That the law was on Tyler's side for now. That she was handcuffed by procedure and body cameras and the 17 different ways this could go wrong. From the ambulance, a sound. Not quite a scream, not quite a shout. Kathleen Murphy's voice ragged with desperation. She's coding. I need help, now. Time stopped. Marcus looked at the ambulance, at his mother invisible behind metal and glass, dying while children played games. He looked at Tyler, still grinning at his phone. He looked down at his hands, scarred knuckles, broken fingers, healed wrong hands that had built engines and broken jaws, and held his mother's hand at his father's funeral. 10 seconds. That's all it would take. 10 seconds to cross the distance. 10 seconds to wipe that grin off Tyler's face. 10 seconds to become exactly what his mother had begged him never to become. Inside the ambulance, Ruth felt herself slipping. The darkness that had claimed her was getting darker, thicker, pulling her down into something that felt like sleep, but wasn't. She could still hear somehow in this strange half-world between living and dying. Could hear Kathleen's panicked voice. Could hear the beeping of machines that measured how close she was to the end. And she could hear silence from outside. The terrible silence that meant Marcus had arrived and was deciding what kind of man he was going to be. She wanted to call out to him, wanted to tell him it was okay to let her go, that she'd lived long enough, that some things weren't worth the cost. But she had no voice, no way to reach him except through the hope that somewhere in his bones he remembered everything she'd taught him. The first lesson had been when Marcus was 6 years old. Hank had been dead 2 years by then, killed in a bar fight that started over nothing and ended with everything. Ruth had taken Marcus to the cemetery, stood him in front of the headstone, and told him the truth. Your father loved you more than anything in this world, but his brain was broken, And the broken part made him do terrible things. You have his blood, baby. You have his fire. But you also have choices he never had. You can choose to be different. Marcus had looked up at her with those serious eyes old before their time and asked the question she'd been dreading. Am I going to be like him? Only if you choose to be, she'd said. And then she'd taken his small hand in hers and made him a promise. I'll teach you how to choose different. I'll teach you every day for the rest of my life if that's what it takes. She'd kept that promise. Through scraped knees and schoolyard fights, through teenage rage and young adult recklessness, through the day he came home with a leather jacket and a patch that said he'd joined the very world she'd hoped to save him from. She'd kept teaching, kept showing him that strength didn't require violence, that power didn't require fear, that being a man meant knowing when not to fight. And now in the silence outside the ambulance, Ruth Brennan lay dying and wondered if any of it had mattered. Marcus's hands curled into fists, uncurled, curled again. Don't become your father, Ruth's voice clear as church bells cutting through the rage. And then Tyler made a mistake. He stepped away from his car, moving toward Marcus, phone held high, recording everything. Come on, old man, do it. Hit me, make me famous. Behind him, one of his friends, drunk stupid, 21 years old and bulletproof, grabbed a beer bottle and threw it. The bottle tumbled through the desert air, brown glass catching sunlight, and struck Marcus's bike. Not hard, barely a scratch on paint that had seen worse. But it was enough. The brothers moved. Not violently, not yet, but they dismounted, a synchronized movement that spoke of training and discipline and the kind of unity that came from bleeding together. They formed a semicircle, cutting off escape routes, boxing in the street racers. Tyler's grin faltered. His friends stopped laughing. Phone still recorded, but the bravado was leaking out of the scene like air from a punctured tire. Last chance. Marcus's voice was desert dry. Move your cars. Tyler looked at his phone, at the viewer count 18,000 now, and climbing at the comments scrolling by, urging him to stand firm, to not back down, to show these boomers who was boss. He looked at Marcus, really looked for the first time, saw something in those eyes that made his mouth go dry. I don't. From the ambulance, Kathleen's voice again, but different now, not desperate, terrified. She's flatlining. I've lost her pulse. I need. The world went white, not literally, but something in Marcus's vision narrowed, focused. And suddenly all he could see was Tyler's face. And all he could feel was the certain knowledge that if his mother died while this child played games, there would be no law, no consequence, no future worth having that would stop him from, wait, Tyler's voice cracking. Wait, okay, just I'll move. I'll help. Marcus's fist was halfway to Tyler's jaw. He didn't remember raising it, didn't remember closing the distance, but there it was, cocked back, ready to deliver judgment. He froze. Inside the ambulance, Ruth felt something change. The darkness pulling at her loosened its grip just slightly, as if the universe itself was holding its breath to see what her son would choose. She thought about the letter in her dresser drawer. The words she'd written that told Marcus about the cancer, about Hank's CTE, about the fact that Marcus himself was showing the same signs his father had shown. She'd written those words knowing they might destroy him, knowing they might be the last thing she ever gave him. But she had also written them knowing that sometimes destruction was necessary. Sometimes you had to tear something down to build it better. Sometimes the kindest thing you could do was tell someone the truth, even when the truth would hurt. Especially when the truth would hurt. Because the alternative was letting them stumble blind into the same darkness that had claimed Hank. The alternative was watching your child become a monster and knowing you could have stopped it but chose silence instead. Ruth had chosen truth, even if it killed her, even if Marcus never forgave her for it. And now, in the space between heartbeats, between the fist that was raised and the blow that hadn't fallen, she waited to see if that truth had been enough. Your car. Marcus's voice didn't sound human. Tyler nodded, frantic. Yeah, yes, my car, the M5. I can get her to the hospital in 10 minutes. I know these streets, I know shortcuts. The words tumbled over each other. I can help. Please let me help. Why? The question came from Axel, who'd moved up beside Marcus. After all this, why now? Tyler's eyes went to the ambulance, to the window where through the glare a shape was visible. Kathleen doing chest compressions on a body too small, too fragile, too old to survive this. Because, Tyler's voice broke. Because 3 years ago my brother died in an ambulance, motorcycle crash, and I wasn't there. And nobody I couldn't, he just... Marcus lowered his fist. Looked at this kid, really looked, and saw something he recognized. Saw the anger that came from guilt. Saw the bravado that covered pain. Saw himself at 24 lost and angry and pretending he wasn't. Your brother's name, Kevin. Kevin Frost. He was 22. Axa put a hand on Marcus's shoulder. Prez, I remember that accident. I-10 rollover. Bad one. Marcus met Tyler's eyes. You can get her there in 10 minutes. I swear to God. You screw this up. You understand what happens. I won't. I swear I won't. Kathleen burst from the ambulance's back doors, wild-eyed. We don't have time for negotiations. She's gone. I need to move her now or get her in his car. Marcus pointed at the BMW. Now. The next 90 seconds were chaos. Kathleen and her partner Tom lifting Ruth so small, so fragile. Marcus had forgotten how small his mother had become onto a backboard. Tyler clearing the back seat of his car, throwing out energy drink cans and fast food wrappers. Brothers surrounding the vehicle, creating space, holding back the crowd. Marcus saw his mother's face for the first time. Gray as ash, mouth slack, eyes closed. She looked dead. Ma, his voice cracked on the word. Ma, I'm here. No response. Kathleen was doing compressions, counting breathing for her. They loaded her into the BMW's back seat. Kathleen climbed in with her barely enough room, but she made it work. Tom squeezed into the front passenger seat. Tyler looked at Marcus. I won't let you down. You better not. Tyler slid behind the wheel. The engine roared to life, obscene horsepower, completely inappropriate for the situation and yet exactly what they needed. Prez, Axel's voice in his ear. You riding with... No. Marcus swung a leg over his Harley. I'm leading escort. We clear every intersection between here and the hospital. Nobody stops us. Nobody. He keyed his radio. All brothers, Formation Alpha. We're running code. Stay tight. 20 engines answered with thunder. The convoy pulled out BMW in the center Harleys, surrounding it like a protective shell. Sirens wailing engines, screaming traffic, scattering before them like birds before a storm. Marcus rode point, and for those 10 minutes he rode like he'd never ridden before. Not reckless, he couldn't afford reckless, but fast, aggressive, claiming every inch of road like it belonged to him. At every intersection, brothers peeled off, blocked, crossed traffic, created a corridor. The BMW streaked through Tyler, driving with a precision that surprised Marcus. The kid knew his machine knew the limits, pushed right up to them, but never over. In the back seat, visible through the rear window, Kathleen worked. Compressions, breath check, pulse, compressions, breathe. Over and over, fighting death with nothing but training and will. Marcus kept pace beside the car, close enough to see, but not close enough to interfere. And as they flew through the Phoenix streets, weaving between traffic, running lights that brothers held clear, he prayed. Not to God. He and God hadn't been on speaking terms since his father died, but to something, to the universe, to fate, to whatever force might be listening. Don't take her, not like this, not while I'm watching. Please. Inside the BMW, Ruth felt hands on her chest, rhythmic pressure that hurt, but also pulled her back from the darkness. She heard Kathleen's voice counting, heard the desperation underneath the professional calm, heard the sound of an engine that was going too fast and somehow not fast enough. She wanted to tell them to stop, wanted to say she'd lived long enough that she was ready, that sometimes the kindest thing was to let go. But some stubborn part of her, the Irish part that had survived famine and immigration and Hank's fists refused to quit. Not yet, not until she knew Marcus was going to be okay. She'd spent 58 years raising him, teaching him, showing him how to be better than his father. She couldn't leave until she knew those lessons had taken root. Couldn't slip into the darkness until she'd seen him make the choice that would define the rest of his life. And he'd made it. Standing there with his fist raised and rage in his eyes, he'd made it. He'd chosen different. Now she just had to stay alive long enough to tell him she was proud. Desert Springs Medical Center appeared ahead. Trauma team visible at the emergency entrance, already mobilized by radio. The BMW screeched to a stop. Doors flew open, Kathleen still doing compressions as they transferred Ruth to a gurney, as doctors swarmed, as machines beeped, and voices called out numbers that meant nothing to Marcus, but everything to them. 83-year-old female ischemic stroke, approximately 40 minutes since symptom onset, coded twice in transport, currently in VFib. They wheeled her inside. Automatic doors swallowed her. Marcus stood in the parking lot, helmet in hand, watching the doors close. Tyler stood beside him, breathing hard. Is she? I don't know. Axel and the brothers arrived, parking their bikes in formation. Discipline even now. Especially now. Prez, Axel's voice was gentle. I need a minute. Take all the time you need. But time was the one thing Marcus didn't have. Time was what they just spent burning through it at 90 miles an hour, hoping it would be enough. He walked to the hospital entrance, stopped, looked back at Tyler. The kid stood by his BMW phone, forgotten for once, looking lost. You did good, kid. Tyler nodded, unable to speak. Why'd you really help? Marcus had to know. The truth. Tyler's eyes filled. Because when Kevin was dying and I was stuck in traffic and I couldn't get there in time, I kept thinking, if someone had just moved, if someone had just let me through, if someone had cared about something other than themselves for 5 seconds. He wiped his face. I couldn't be that person. Not again. Marcus walked back, extended his hand. Tyler looked at it like it might be a trap, then took it. Thank you, Marcus said, and meant it. Inside the hospital, a nurse approached. Mr. Brennan, your mother's in surgery. Dr. Vance is operating. It's going to be several hours. There's a waiting room. I'll wait here, Marcus gestured to the plastic chairs by the window. Sir, it could be 5-6 hours. Then I'll be here for 5 or 6 hours. The nurse recognized the tone, nodded left. Axel sat down beside him. Then the other brothers filling the waiting room, a wall of leather and loyalty. Tyler hesitated at the door. I should probably. Sit down, kid. Marcus didn't look up. You're part of this now. So Tyler sat and they waited. The sun moved across the sky. Afternoon bled into evening. The waiting room lights came on, fluorescent and harsh. Marcus stared at his hands. These hands that had almost struck a child. These hands that had almost become his father's hands. He thought about his mother's voice on the phone that morning. The way she'd asked him to promise to read the letters if something happened. The way she'd said it like she knew something he didn't. She'd known. Somehow Ruth Brennan had known that today was the day everything would change. And she'd prepared for it, not just with letters in a dresser drawer, but with a lifetime of lessons about choosing different, about being better, about knowing when not to fight. 5 hours. That's how long Marcus sat in that waiting room, watching the clock on the wall tick through seconds that felt like centuries. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead, that particular frequency that burrowed into your skull and made time feel even slower than it already was. Around him, brothers came and went. Axel stayed the whole time, solid as a cornerstone, saying nothing because nothing needed saying. That was the thing about real friendship. It knew when silence was the greatest gift you could give. Tyler stayed too. The kid had slumped in his chair around hour 3, phone battery dead, followers, forgotten, just a 24-year-old who'd stumbled into something bigger than his live stream could contain. At 7:43 in the evening, the surgery doors opened. Dr. Eleanor Vance emerged, still in her scrub, surgical cap pulled off to reveal gray hair pulled back in a practical bun. She was 50-something, with the kind of ace that had delivered both miracles and tragedies and had learned not to show either until she was certain which one she was carrying. Marcus stood. Axel stood with him. The whole room stood, actually. 12 leather-clad men rising like a congregation at church. Mr. Brennan, Dr. Vance's voice was professionally neutral. Your mother's surgery was successful. We removed the clot. She's stable. The relief hit like a physical blow. Marcus's knees actually buckled slightly, and Axel's hand on his shoulder was the only thing that kept him upright. Can I see her? In a few hours. She's in recovery now. But Mr. Brennan, there's something else we need to discuss. Somewhere private. The relief curdled into dread. They walked to a consultation room. Sterile, windowless, designed for conversations nobody wanted to have. Dr. Vance gestured to chairs. Marcus remained standing. Just tell me. Dr. Vance opened a tower that pulled up charts that looked like abstract art rendered in medical terminology. When we ran your mother's pre-surgical blow work, we found markers. Elevated CA19-9 abnormal liver function, several other indicators that prompted us to run additional tests. English doc. Your mother has pancreatic cancer. Stage 4, metastatic. It spread to her liver and possibly her lungs. The room tilted, not dramatically, just enough that Marcus had to put a hand on the back of a chair to steady himself. How long has she known? Dr. Vance looked at her tablet. Based on the progression of the disease, I'd estimate she's known for at least 9 months, possibly longer. 9 months. Ruth had known for 9 months and hadn't said a word, hadn't complained, hadn't asked for help, just kept watering her roses and calling him every Sunday morning and pretending everything was fine. Treatment options. Mr. Brennan at this stage with her age and the stroke treatment would buy her time, but not much. Chemotherapy would be brutal on her system. 3 months, maybe 6 if she responds well. Without treatment, we're looking at weeks. Marcus thought about the phone call that morning. The way Ruth had made him promise to read the letters. The way she'd said it like she knew something he didn't. She'd known she was dying, had known for months, had chosen to keep it to herself because that's who Ruth Brennan was. Someone who carried her own weight even when the weight was killing her. There's one more thing. Dr. Vance pulled an envelope from her pocket. The nurse found this in your mother's personal effects. It's addressed to you. She left specific instructions that if anything happened to her, this was to be given to you immediately. The envelope was standard white, Ruth's handwriting on the front in blue ink that had started to fade. Just his name, Marcus. He took it with hands that had stopped shaking sometime during the last 5 hours and started again now. I'll give you privacy. Dr. Vance moved toward the door. Your mother should be awake in another hour or so. The nurse will come and get you. Then she was gone, and Marcus was alone with an envelope that weighed nothing and everything. He sat down, stared at it, turned it over in his hands. The seal was old-fashioned, the kind you licked, and he could see where Ruth's tongue had moistened the glue. Such an intimate thing, such a mundane detail, and it nearly broke him right there. He opened it. Inside, 2 pieces of paper. The first was Ruth's handwriting, that careful script she'd learned in Catholic school 70 years ago. My wild boy, if you're reading this, you know, I'm sorry I didn't tell you sooner. Not because I was afraid you know your old ma better than that, but because I know you, Marcus Brennan. You would have stopped living your life to try to save mine. You would have hovered and worried and driven me crazy with all your big plans to fix the unfixable. I've had 83 years, good years, hard years. Years with your father that nearly broke me, and years without him that taught me I was stronger than I thought. I raised you. I saw you become a man, not the man I expected maybe, but a man with honor. That's all a mother can ask. The cancer doesn't scare me. I made my peace with God a long time ago, and I figure he owes me some answers anyway. What scares me is you wasting the time you have left being angry like your daddy was. I need you to know something about Hank, something I should have told you years ago but couldn't find the courage. Your father wasn't just mean, Marcus. He was sick. In 1978, when things were getting really bad, I dragged him to a doctor. He went once, only once, because Hank Brennan didn't do doctors. They did brain scans, found damage, lots of it, from all those boxing matches before he joined the club. They said he'd had over 200 fights, and every one of them left a mark. The doctor used words like chronic traumatic encephalopathy and irreversible cognitive decline, said Hank's brain looked like a war zone, said the violence, the mood swings, the blackouts, none of it was really him choosing it. It was the damage choosing for him. I didn't want to believe it. Easier to think he was just mean. You know, if he was just mean, then I could leave. But if he was sick, how do you leave a sick man? He died in that bar fight because his brain couldn't tell him to stop. And I enabled it, Marcus. I made excuses. I told everyone he was just passionate, just protective, just old-fashioned. I let it happen. Baby, you've had over 40 motorcycle crashes in 30 years. I counted. I kept track of every hospital visit, every concussion, every time you said you were fine, but I could see you weren't. You get headaches you think I don't know about. You have gaps in your memory. Last month, you told me the same story 3 times in one conversation. You're showing the same signs he did. Please, Marcus, get tested. Don't become him because you don't know you're sick. Don't waste the years you have left thinking you're fighting your nature when you might be fighting your neurology. I'm not asking you to quit the club. I'm asking you to take care of yourself, to be honest about what's happening in your head, to choose a different ending than your father got. I love you. Always have, always will, even when I'm gone. Stop running, boy. Face what's chasing you. Your ma P.S. There's money, not much, but enough in an account at Desert Federal. Use it for the testing. Use it for whatever comes next. Don't be stubborn about this. For once in your life, accept help. Marcus read the letter 3 times. Each reading revealed different layers. The first time brought shock. His father had understood what was happening to him. The second brought grief. Hank had lived in his own personal hell, watching himself become a monster. The third brought recognition. This was Marcus's future if he didn't change course. The second piece of paper was older, yellowed at the edges. Hank's handwriting, those block letters he'd learned before dropping out of school at 14. Marcus, your ma says I should write this down. Said someday you'll want to know why your old man is the way he is. So here goes. I know what I am. I see it in your eyes when you look at me. Fear, sometimes hate, I put that there. Made you afraid of your own father, and that's a weight I'll carry to my grave. The doctors say my brain is broken. Say all those boxing matches before you were born scrambled me up so bad I can't think straight anymore. Say the rage isn't really me choosing it. It's the damage talking. But here's the thing, Marcus. Don't matter if it's me or the damage. Either way, it's my hands doing the hitting, my voice doing the yelling, my choices that landed me in this cell. I tried to stop. God is my witness. I tried. But my head isn't mine anymore. I'll be fine 1 minute, then something flips and I'm gone. When I come back, there's blood on my knuckles and terror in people's eyes, and I can't remember how it got that way. I'm writing this on a clear day, a good day, so I can tell you straight, don't be like me. I know every father says that to his son, but I mean it different. Don't let anger consume you from the inside. Don't confuse being tough with being cruel. Don't mistake fear for respect. You got my temper. I see it in you already, even at 11. But you also got your ma's heart, and that's worth more than any amount of muscle. When the anger comes, and it will come, it's in your blood, you'll have choices I never had. You got a brain that works. You got time to walk away. You got the chance to be better than your old man ever was. Take it. I love you, boy. I'm sorry I couldn't show it right. I'm sorry I'm leaving you with memories that will haunt you. I'm sorry for everything I did and everything I couldn't stop myself from doing. But mostly I'm sorry I won't be there to see the man you become. I hope to God he's nothing like me. Your father, Hank Marcus, sat in that consultation room and wept. Not the quiet tears of grief, but the deep body-shaking sobs of a man confronting the truth he had spent a lifetime running from. His father had known, had understood, had tried to warn him. And his mother had known too, had watched him repeating Hank's patterns, had counted his crashes and concussions, had seen the signs everyone else missed. And instead of letting him stumble blind into the same darkness that claimed Hank, she told him the truth, even knowing it might destroy him, even knowing she might not be there to help him put the pieces back together. That was love, not the soft kind that protected you from pain, the hard kind that hurts you now to save you later. Axel found him 20 minutes later, still sitting with the letters in his lap and tears on his face. Prez. Marcus handed him the letters without a word. Axel read both. His face, normally impassive, went through a journey. Surprise, understanding, something that might have been grief. How long you known, Axel asked quietly. About the headaches, the blackouts, you knew. Brother, I've ridden with you for 15 years. I've seen you forget conversations, seen you lose time, figured it was stress, figured it was age catching up. Axel folded the letters carefully, handed them back. Never thought it might be this. What do I do? It was the first time Marcus had asked that question in a decade. Presidents didn't ask what to do. They decided, they led, they bore the weight of choice alone. But Axel didn't flinch. You do what your ma said. You get tested. You find out what you're dealing with. Then you decide. And if it's then it's bad. But at least you'll know. A nurse appeared in the doorway. Mr. Brennan, your mother's awake. She's asking for you. Ruth looked small in the hospital bed. The machines surrounding her, monitors and IVs, and things that beeped with reassuring regularity, made her seem even smaller, like she was being absorbed by technology, becoming less real with each passing moment. But her eyes were open, clear, and when Marcus walked in, she smiled. Hey, Ma. My boy. Her voice was rough, scratchy, from the breathing tube they'd removed an hour ago. You read it? Marcus pulled a chair close to the bed, sat down, took her hand. It felt like paper and bone, so fragile he was afraid to squeeze too hard. Yeah, I read it. Mad at me, terrified, heartbroken, but not mad. Never mad at you, Ma. Ruth's smile widened slightly. Good, because we don't have time for you to be stubborn. How long have you known about the cancer? Year and a half, maybe more. Lost track. 18 months. She'd known for 18 months and kept it to herself. Kept watering her roses and calling him every Sunday and living like tomorrow was guaranteed. Why didn't you tell me? Because you would have stopped living to watch me die. And I didn't want my last months to be a death watch. She coughed, a wet sound that made Marcus reach for the water cup. She sipped through a straw. Wanted normal for as long as I could have it. There's nothing normal about hiding cancer, Ma. Maybe not, but it was my choice, my body, my death. She fixed him with those clear eyes, the same eyes that had stared down drunks and doctors and his father in full rage. Now you got to make choices about your body, your life. I'll get tested, I promise. And I don't know yet, Ma. I don't know what comes after. Ruth nodded slowly. That's okay, not knowing is honest. Just don't run from it. They sat in silence for a while. Outside the window, Phoenix was turning on its lights, the city becoming a constellation of human hope against the desert dark. There's one more thing I need to tell you, Ruth said, her voice barely above a whisper. About today, about what happened out there. Marcus tensed. He'd been waiting for this, waiting for her to ask what he'd almost done, what kind of man he'd almost become. I heard it, she continued, when I was in the ambulance. Couldn't see, couldn't move, but I could hear. Heard Kathleen calling you. Heard the music from those cars. Heard that boy laughing. Ma, hush, let me finish. She squeezed his hand with what little strength she had. I was so scared, Marcus, not of dying. I've been ready for that for months. I was scared you'd arrive too angry, too much like your father, scared you'd do something you couldn't take back. Tears ran down her face, but she kept talking. And then I heard your voice when you told that boy to move, heard the control in it, the choice. You were so close to the edge, baby, so close, but you chose different. She pulled his hand to her chest over her heart. That's when I knew I could go. Not today, but soon. Knew I'd done my job, taught you what you needed to know, shown you how to be better than your father. I almost hit him, Ma. I was this close. Almost doesn't count. You had your fist raised and you stopped. That's what matters. That's the difference between you and Hank. He couldn't stop. You can. Marcus wiped his eyes. The doctors say you have weeks, maybe a month. Then we've got time to finish this right. Finish what? Ruth smiled, that wicked grin he remembered from childhood, the one that meant she had a plan. Teaching you how to live after I'm gone. The next day, Marcus met with Dr. Webb. The neurologist, Dr. Vance, had called in. The cognitive tests were harder than they should have been. Counting backwards by sevens, remembering 3 words, drawing a clock face. Marcus failed more than he passed. The MRI came next. 45 minutes in a machine that hummed and clicked, mapping the architecture of his deterioration. When the results came back, Dr. Webb didn't sugarcoat it. Chronic traumatic encephalopathy, stage 2 progressing towards stage 3. The damage is cumulative and irreversible. But Mr. Brennan, we caught this early. With lifestyle changes, you can slow the progression significantly. What kind of changes? No more head trauma, no more fights, no more high-risk riding. Every concussion from here on accelerates the timeline. Right now with management, you might have 20 good years. If you continue as you are, you're looking at 5 before severe symptoms set in. 20 years versus 5. The math was simple. The choice wasn't. Being president meant being first through the door, first into the fight, first to take the hit. It meant putting your body between your brothers and danger consequences be damned. It meant the kind of life that would turn his brain to mush in 5 years. Marcus thought about Ruth's letter, about Hank's letter, about the 2 people who'd loved him most in this world, both warning him from beyond their own tragedies. He thought about the moment on Cedar Hill Boulevard, fist raised, Tyler's face inches away, the terrible certainty that one punch would feel so good and cost so much. And he thought about Ruth's words, almost doesn't count. You stopped, that's what matters. I need to make some changes, Marcus said. That night he called a meeting. 14 brothers, all patch holders, gathered in his living room. Marcus stood before them and told the truth. I'm sick. Same thing that killed my old man. CTEA, brain damage from all the crashes and fights. It's not going to get better. Only going to get worse. He explained the choice. 5 years continuing as he was, 20 years if he stepped back. I'm stepping down as president. The words hit like a bomb. Brothers started to protest, but Axel stood. Then I'm stepping up, if you'll have me. The vote was quick, unanimous. Axel became president with a show of hands that took 30 seconds. But you stay, Axel said. Retired elder. We need your wisdom, even if we can't use your fists. Marcus nodded. One more thing. My ma's dying, cancer. She's got weeks, maybe a month. I'm bringing her home, setting up hospice. I'm going to need help. You got it. From all of them. A chorus that reminded Marcus why he had given 30 years to these men. 3 days later, Marcus brought Ruth home. The brothers made it happen. Hospital bed in her room window overlooking the roses. Oxygen, medications, everything she'd need. Tyler showed up at dawn with paint and brushes, transforming her bedroom into the pale yellow she requested. The kid transplanted a rose bush into a pot, positioned it where she could see it. By afternoon, Ruth was settled, looking out at her garden like a queen returned to her kingdom. Better than that hospital prison, she announced. Patricia Walsh, the hospice nurse, gave them the timeline. 2 weeks, maybe 3. Ruth spent those weeks teaching Marcus how to live. She taught him about her roses, which ones needed more water, which thrived in shade, which demanded sun. She made him practice until he could tell by touch when the soil was right. These roses will outlive me, she said. They need someone who knows how to care for them. She taught him about grief, about the difference between mourning someone and carrying them forward. When I'm gone, you're going to hurt. Let yourself hurt, but don't let the hurt become who you are. Your father did that. Let his guilt eat him alive. Don't make that mistake. She taught him about forgiveness. On day 8, she asked for the wooden box from her closet. Inside was Hank's urn, brass gone green with age. I want you to mix our ashes, she said. Bury us together under the roses. We were married 47 years, counting the ones after he died. I'm not quitting now. After everything he did to you, the disease did it, not Hank. I'm choosing to remember the man, not the monster. She touched the urn gently. You need to make that choice too, baby. Remember your father before the damage. Remember he loved you more than anything. She pulled out the second envelope, the one Hank had written. He knew he was sick, knew he couldn't stop himself. That's a special kind of hell, watching yourself become a monster and being powerless to change it. Marcus read his father's letter again, seeing it differently now. Not an excuse, an explanation, a warning. I forgive him, Marcus said and meant it. Ruth's eyes filled with tears. Good. Now you need to forgive yourself for being his son. The days marched on. Ruth grew weaker, but her mind stayed sharp. She called Tyler in on day 16. You remind me of Marcus at your age, she told the kid. Angry, lost, searching for something to fill the emptiness. He found it in the club. You're finding it in the work. That's better. But don't make work your whole existence. Find someone to love. Find something to believe in besides your own pain. Tyler, 6 weeks sober by then, promised he would. Ruth called the brothers in on day 14. All 14 of them crowded into her bedroom. You boys take care of my son, she said, voice weak but commanding. He's going to need you, and you, she pointed at Axel. Make sure he doesn't come crawling back. He's done his time. They all promised. To Patricia, she said, he needs someone. Too stubborn to see it, but he does. Don't be afraid to make the first move. Patricia blushed but nodded. To Marcus, she said everything and nothing. They talked about roses and recipes and the proper way to make pot roast. They talked about Hank's good years before the damage. They talked about Marcus's childhood, about the day he was born, about the first time he rode a motorcycle, and she'd been terrified he'd kill himself. But you didn't, she said. You're still here, still fighting, still choosing. On the morning of day 17, Ruth woke more lucid than she'd been in days. It's today, she said simply. Marcus knew what she meant. He'd been a nurse's son long enough to recognize the rally, that final surge of energy before the end. I'm scared, Ma. I know, baby. Me too. What if I can't do this without you? Ruth took his hand. You've been doing it your whole life. I just gave you tools. You're the one who chose to use them. She told him about the account at Desert Federal, $43,000 saved over decades. That's for your new life, the one you're going to build. I'm thinking a motorcycle shop, custom work. Give those other boys the same chance you're giving Tyler. A shop. Call it second wind, she said, because that's what you're giving yourself. That's what you'll give them. They talked until afternoon when Ruth grew tired. She slept for a few hours, woke as the sun was setting. Marcus, I'm here, but I need you to promise me something. Anything. When I'm gone, you live, not just survive. Live, fall in love, build something, help people, be the man your father wanted to be but couldn't. I promise. Good, she smiled. Now there's something I need to tell you about what I saw today in the ambulance. What did you see? I saw you standing there with your fist raised, saw the choice you were making. Tears ran down her face. I was so proud, baby. So proud you chose right. Almost didn't. Almost doesn't count. You stopped. That's everything. She closed her eyes. I'm tired now. Rest, Ma. Will you sing for me Amazing Grace? Marcus's voice cracked, but he sang. The same hymn she'd sung that morning in the garden a lifetime ago. Amazing Grace, how sweet the sound. Ruth's breathing slowed. I once was lost, but now am found. Her hand grew still in his. Was blind, but now I see. At 3:47 in the morning, Ruth Brennan took her last breath. Marcus sat holding her hand, feeling it grow cold, and whispered, Thank you, Ma, for everything. The funeral happened 4 days later. 200 people came to see Ruth laid to rest, her ashes mixed with Hank's buried under the largest rose bush in her garden. Marcus delivered the eulogy. My mother taught me that strength isn't about never falling. It's about getting back up. That love isn't about perfection. It's about choosing someone anyway. That legacy isn't what you leave when you die. It's what you pass on while you live. He touched the urn. Rest easy, Ma. And Hank, you take care of her now. Bagpipes played. Brothers revved their engines. Thunder for a woman who'd raised a storm. 6 weeks later, Second Wind Custom Motorcycles opened in a converted garage on Phoenix's east side. Tyler ran the front. 3 other men worked the bays, all fresh from prison, all needing what Marcus was offering. A second chance. Marcus taught them the craft. Not just how to rebuild engines, but why. Not just how to fix motorcycles, but how to fix themselves. Patricia started coming by. Casual at first, then regular. 3 months after Ruth's death, they had dinner. Just 2 people learning to be human again. 6 months after Ruth's death, Marcus's follow-up scans showed the CTE progression had slowed dramatically. Keep doing what you're doing, Dr. Webb said. You're buying yourself years. 1 year after Ruth's death, Marcus stood in her garden at sunrise. The roses bloomed extravagantly as if Ruth was still tending them. He watered them the way she'd taught him, slowly, steadily, tending to each plant. Tyler found him there. 10 months sober, enrolled in college teaching the new apprentices. Boss, the veteran's here, the one with PTSD. Marcus nodded. I'll be right there. He walked back to the shop past the sign Patricia had helped design. Second Wind Custom Motorcycles. Inside, the smell of motor oil and coffee. Classic rock on the radio. The sound of men who'd lost themselves finding their way back. The veteran was 28, back from Iraq, hands shaking but eyes clear. Marcus shook his hand. Welcome to Second Wind. Let's get started. That evening, Marcus rode to the cemetery. Still rode, just carefully. Never fast, always safe. He sat by Ruth's grave watching the sunset paint the desert copper and gold. Hey, Ma, shop's doing well. Tyler's thriving. We've got a new vet starting tomorrow. The roses nodded in the breeze. Patricia's coming for dinner. Your pot roast recipe. Think I finally got it right. The sun touched the horizon. I'm not running anymore, Ma. Not from the diagnosis. Not from what Hank was. Not from what I almost became. I'm just here, present, choosing. He stood, touched the headstone, still warm from the day. Every mile matters. You taught me that, and I'm making them count. He rode home through the gathering dark, not fleeing, not chasing, just riding the path he'd chosen mile by careful mile. Behind him, the roses bloomed in darkness. Ahead, whatever time remained. And somewhere between memory and hope, between the man he'd been and the man he was becoming, Marcus Brennan found what his father never could. Peace, not the peace of endings, the peace of acceptance. The peace of knowing every choice from here forward was his own, made with clear eyes and steady hands, and a brain that still for now belonged to him. He rode into the night feeling his mother's presence in the cooling air, in the scent of roses on the desert wind, in the quiet certainty that he was finally truly heading home.